What's up, everybody? It's Andrea. Today, it's a wonderful life in space. Those Naussicans sure know how to party. And we ask the question, why didn't we get young Picard in this episode? Stick with us.
Welcome to the TNG Podcast, the #1 place in the Alpha Quadrant to geek out about all things Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'm your co-host, Shereese.
Hey, I'm your co-host, Andrea. Today we are talking Season 6, Episode 15, Tapestry. This episode was written by Ronald D. Moore and directed by Les Landau. So basically, it's a wonderful life in space. Right? After being attacked on an away mission, Captain Picard dies and meets Q in the afterlife, who offers him the chance to change a crucial moment in his history and prevent the mistakes he made in his youth. I love this premise. I don't love the episode, though. What are your initial thoughts on this?
So I was really excited about this episode. And then when I finished it, I was less excited. It's kind of the opposite of, it's the opposite of last week, where last week I was like, this is so not memorable. Like, I don't know what to expect. This one, I had so many like fond memories of this episode being really good.
Yeah.
And it wasn't what I remembered. So then I'm like, was I remembering a totally different episode? But there was only two about this whole heart stabbing thing. And the first one was really dumb. And I thought this one was really good. But it wasn't really that good. What I will say though, is I really do love this premise. I love the whole sliding doors idea of like one change, could change your whole path or whatever.
Yes.
And this is actually my final thought too. So I guess I'll repeat it. Like that, that idea I love. And every time I see that in a show, I'm here for it, especially when it's, you can't do that until like season 4, at least, of a show, because you have to have enough history to be like, here's all the things that would change.
Here's all the stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can only do that episode exactly once, because if you do it more than once, it's really stupid. But I have to say, every time one of my favorite shows does it, I love it. I'm here for it, because you're like, oh, that was different. Oh, that was different. Like, something about that idea is really, I don't know. It's just like, it can't go wrong.
I agree with you. I think here's what it is it's a little bit like the Conundrum episode where you get to see familiar characters doing unfamiliar things. So they feel kind of new to you in a way, right? So it's like we get to see Picard sort of like redoing some things in his life that he regrets and seeing the consequences of that, or like seeing what happens as a result. So for me, I always love seeing John Delancey come back as Q. Q is one of my, he is my favorite character on the show.
I think he was the best character in this episode. Like, every time you see him, it's just like, hey there.
Also, this was a slightly different Q. This one was, and there's a reason for it, which I'll get into, but he's a little bit more like subdued, right? And because this has a little bit more of like a serious tone to it, where it's like, Picard, I'm giving you this chance, But I remember this episode being a little bit depressing, especially seeing like the stalwart, like Iron Captain as like this meek little science officer in the end, where you're like, damn, that fucking sucks. But yeah, like I always love seeing John Delancey. I love him, and I love Q so much. But I was a lot more excited about this episode than last week, for sure. But yeah, by the end, I was like, God, this isn't my least favorite Q episode, which is Hiding Q, the one with like the French pink frogs. Like, that's the worst.
The one with the green screen that is still green in the episode.
I am willing to pay money to somebody to like scrub that from my memory banks. Okay. Like, that episode is terrible and happens to feature Q. This one is like, I think my second like least favorite episode, but it's a lot better than Hide and Q. Let me tell you, this is like first place, second place of least favorite episodes, but this second place is like 10,000 miles away from
right. Like, in like when there's only like 2 places. Second place is like really far away, but there's only 2 places. So doesn't matter. I will say, I think Q was fantastic in this episode. Like, every time Q pops up, he is, but this episode, every time you turn around, you're like, oh my gosh, it's Q again. Oh my gosh, it's Q again. It's like this little bite-sized burst of like humor, but also you're like, he's just like, thought that's what you said, Picard. You're just like, he's like the little voice, the little cricket, Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder, but like,
he's the little devil on the shoulder
one. A snarky version. And I just thought that
snarky Jiminy Cricket,
a snarky Jiminy Cricket, who instead of telling you the way to go, he just criticizes every way that you have. I feel like I have one of those Jiminy Crickets, but I really enjoyed Q in this episode. It's just the episode itself. So like Andrea already described it. This is the one where like kind of wakes up and he's back in the academy. I mean, he literally just graduated like a week ago or whatever. So he's like out of the academy technically, but really like academy. And he's waiting for his first assignment, and him and his two best friends. And, you know, it's just like them kind of hanging around. So it's a slice of life, but it's a slice of life from 20 years ago. Picard is not 20 years younger. He's the same age, but he's hanging around with these kids and like trying to be this cautious older man, hanging around with young, like vivacious,
brash.
Kids. And it just was kind of weird.
It just doesn't work. Yeah, it doesn't work. So let's just jump on in. I have a feeling this episode's going to be shorter than our normal because it's kind of like,
I don't know. Every time we say that, it's
flat in a way. I don't know. Like the Aquiel one, it was shorter. It wasn't as short as we thought it was, because once I edited it, I was like, oh wow, this is still 40 minutes of ragging on this piece of shit episode. But the one before it was like an hour and 15 minutes or whatever. So yeah. I love that weeks later we're still like, do not watch Aquiel. Like, just don't do it. You know what, girl? If I died and Q gave me something to do over, I would just go back and not watch that.
That's hilarious.
Episode. That would be it.
That's the monumental change I'd make in my past. Not watching.
And then I'd wake up and be like, phew. Yeah. Anyway, all right. So we're really starting this episode like in the middle of the action, like right in the middle. We're in sickbay. Beverly and other medical personnel are rushing around, like getting ready to receive emergency cases, which is really cool to see. You know, and Worf beams in, like carrying Picard, who's been hit in the chest with a compressed Terion beam. And I was like, that tracks. That tracks. Look at how bad the damage is. What else could it have been but a compressed Terion beam?
That compressed Terion beam somehow drew Picard's blood out of his body, like without leaving any marks on his actual clothes, which is like, what the F does that?
That's what Terion beams do. That's what Terion beams do, I guess.
Give me a bullet, man. Give me a bullet any day. You could just plug the hole. But that just like sucking blood from your body, that's crazy.
Yeah, no. Well, it also, I didn't think of it as like his blood. I just thought it was like plasma burn or something like on his uniform. Either way, it looks bad. And he's been hit right in the chest. Riker says the Lunarians attacked right outside the conference room. So I'm guessing they were there to like broker peace talks or something. Beverly cannot get him stabilized. She is trying every hypo spray in the book. She's doing like 50 cc's of whatever. And his artificial heart has fused shut. And so she's losing him. Like all of his systems are failing. And this is the shot that we see is we get this standard like overhead shot of someone who's dying, which you see that so much in like movies and TV. Someone's dying and then the camera is like looking directly overhead and then kind of pans away as though like their soul is like flying out of their body or whatever. And so then there's like blinding white light and Picard finds himself standing in the afterlife. And then a man in a white robe is standing there glowing, and you can't really see him very well because it's like white on white on white. It's all glowy. He reaches his hand up to Picard, who takes his hand. And as the man steps forward, it's Q. And he says, "Welcome to the afterlife, Picard. You're dead." And I was like, damn, that's not how you want to receive that news. Okay.
I mean, if you have to receive the news, I guess the pull off the Band-Aid method is just as good as any other method.
He was like, "You're dead." I was like, geez, okay.
Yeah. And then it goes to commercial break, which was perfect. So a couple points in that sick bay scene. One, when Beverly comes in and she's getting everything ready, she says, "Have Dr. Salar use Ward 3 for the ambulatory patients." And I was like, I was like,
Salar's still here.
She's still here on the ship. She's like a throwback from season 1. So glad she's still working aboard. We love Salar.
Can we just get Susie Plaxon back? I mean, I know she died as Kalar, but we fucking love her as Salar too.
Like, I kind of wanted to see her like just pop her head and be like, "I've got it" right away, but she didn't. Anyways, so that was one thing.
Oh, that would have been so great. Oh my God.
Then later on, like in the same scene, Picard goes into cardiac arrest, and Beverly puts these corticostimulators on his head, which are kind of like defibrillators, right? Since he's in cardiac arrest. But for some reason, they're on the temples of his head instead of on his actual heart, which the way defibrillators work is they shoot electricity to the heart to get the heart to keep pumping, because that's how the heart pumps. Yeah, the heart pumps with electrical currents. And if you put electrical currents in your brain, it's going to mess up the electrical currents that make your brain work. So that kind of doesn't track. But the thing I wanted to mention was, you know how when people put on defibrillators and everyone's like, clear, stand clear, you know, you'll get shocked too. Well, I was rewatching Mythbusters and they tested that myth of if you're touching someone when they get defibrillated, would that actually shock your heart as well? And it turns out, according to their tests, you would absolutely die. Like it 100% passed.
Really?
The electricity passes into the person who's getting defibrillated, goes right into your hand or whatever part of you touching them.
Because it's a closed circuit.
Shocks your heart. And if your heart is pumping properly, it will stop pumping. And I thought that was like really shocking, because I know you always hear it, but it's kind of like, I think like it's a safety precaution to be over safe. But it's like, no, it's like bare minimum safe. Like seriously, don't touch those people. When they say clear, get clear. So I thought that was a little PSA.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I was like, you could
if you're holding someone's hand who's being defibrillated, you will don't do that. Yeah. Okay. And you'll be fibrillated and you don't want to be fibrillated. Yeah. Okay. No. So don't do that. Wow. That's good to know. Thank you for watching Mythbusters and like getting the message out.
Yeah, thank you Mythbusters for being amazing. Yeah, because I mean they test it because you're like, I don't know, they say keep clear, you probably should. And then when they saw it, they were like, yeah, that second person died. I was like,
that's 100%. Oh my God.
Okay, so don't do that. Anyways, now we're in the Matrix.
Yeah, don't do that. So now we're in the afterlife, which I found a little bit of background information on. Portraying the afterlife created a whole bunch of technical problems for the crew. With John Delancey in a white robe on a white background, director of photography Jonathan West and producer Mary Howard were both concerned that like Q would appear merely as like a floating head. Mm-hmm. So both actors were aware of the difficulties of the shot, and like Delancey actually felt that it made his performance in the scene like more subdued. And Ronald Moore, who wrote this episode, noted that like this low key result was perfect for this like more serious than usual Q episode, because now we're dealing with like, you know, Q takes death very glibly, but Picard is like his pet in a way. And so for Picard to die, it's like he has a vested interest. It's more, you know, it reminds me, I love Greek mythology. It reminds me of Hermes, who was the messenger god, but also he was responsible for like, for escorting the dead, like to the underworld. And that was like the only time he was ever serious in his role, was this very like somber occasion. Where he had to like transport the dead. And so I thought of that a lot with Q, where I was like, here he is, like he's this, you know, and like Hermes was also like a trickster god as well. So like Q is very much this trickster god. And like, this is the one time he's really serious. But I also, you know, knowing that little background about the white on white and the problems that it created and how they had to do all this technical stuff to make it look like he wasn't just a floating head. I thought that the result was actually very cool. It was really cool.
Scene is really cool. Like I wrote, instead of Afterlife, I wrote Matrix, because this is like the white room in the Matrix.
Totally.
And I thought it looked really good. Like I was obsessed with Q's robe. Did you see like the sleeve on sleeve on sleeve? I was like,
oh my God. And he had all these like panels. Yeah. Oh, it was so cool.
As a seamstress, I was just like, but how? And I know that thing had to be so freaking heavy. There was so much fabric on that, but it was worth it. It was gorgeous. It was gorgeous. So anyways, Q tells Picard he died 5 minutes ago due to Beverly's ineptitude. And I was like, well, I guess since he can't hate Tasha Yar anymore, he's got to turn that venom on someone. So why not Beverly? I mean, but really, he hates everybody. And so
I feel like Q is quite the misogynist, I got to say.
He is, but he also hates Worf and Riker. So I was like, I think he just hates everybody, and except for Picard,
he hates humans.
Yeah, humans and Klingons, I guess. But So Q starts bringing back people from Picard's past to like terrorize him or something. I don't know what, but we see Picard's father, who this actor they got to play Picard's father. I was like, that's legit. Like I buy that, because he looked like Robert to me. So I was like,
he does. I wondered if it was the same actor. I wondered if it was the same actor. You know what? I didn't actually look it up because I was so busy like writing down all the notes. It could have been, but even if they would have gotten the actor who played Robert, it would totally track, because like fathers and sons, you know, it's like you get, you know,
they look alike.
Genetics. Right. Yep. They look alike a lot of times. So it's like, okay. But yeah, no. And his father says, I told you not to run off to Starfleet. Why couldn't you have just listened? Even now you've managed to disappoint me. And I was like, wow, God, that is freaking harsh. And then it gets worse. We start hearing these disembodied voices, and these are all the people who have died through his actions or inactions. So it's just like,
which as a Starfleet captain of a flagship, a lot of people have died along the way.
a lot of people, right? And this is not the first ship he's captained. This is not the first away mission he's been on where people have done, right? So it's like all these voices speaking over each other in their last moments. So they're like, shields are failing. What do we do? Captain, what do we do? Right? Like that's, oh my God.
And it was like, Lieutenant, help us. Commander, help us.
Yeah.
Ensign, help us. And you're like, oh gosh. Yeah. It's like Q for some reason really wanted Picard to be hyper aware of all of his regrets. And he kept kind of prodding at him with that. Like, do you regret anything? Do you regret anything? You know, and so he's doing this to kind of make him be like, oh, woe is me. I've lived a terrible life or something. Like, I don't really know Q's end game in all of this, but this is what he's doing. So then we see this other reenactment take place where we see a young Picard fighting with 3 Naussicans, like totally full on fist fighting with them and tossing them, and they're kicking him and he's punching them and all this stuff. And then at one point, one of the Naussicans takes this huge, long, ridiculously gigantic blade.
Like a 14-inch blade.
Like a 14-inch blade. Like who even, like a small sword, like crazy. So he takes this knife.
Like a dagger. Yeah.
Yeah, but like, I mean, a 14-inch dagger? Like, what is that? So he takes this long...
But to be fair, the Naussicans are like 8 feet tall.
Yeah. I did think about that too. Like in their scabbard, that would actually look perfectly fine. But... He stabs Picard in the back, and the blade is so long that it's not even up to the hilt, and the blade is sticking several inches out of his chest. Like, it's huge. And young Picard falls to his knees, stares at the blade, starts laughing, and then collapses. And Picard and Q are just watching the scene, and Q is like, was that you laughing? And Picard's just like, yep, that was me. And then he says something like, you know, I was so brash as a kid or whatever. Like I wish I would have done that differently. And that's when Q's like,
he says he had far too much ego and far too little discipline or wisdom. Yeah. And that's where Q's like, if you had to do it all over again, and Picard's like, well, things would be different. First of all, by the way, there's a lot of Picard huffing and puffing about being dead that we're just glossing over, where he's like, I can't be dead. This is no. And even if I was, and even if I was dead, you're not God. So, all right, you know, so finally he kind of gets around the idea, right? So this is where he's like, if I had to do this over again, it would be different. And right when he says it'd be different, there was this split second where Q, who's standing behind Picard, smiles like, awesome, right? And then slap, he's smacked by a woman. He's now not in the White Room. He's in what looks like an Academy apartment, right? And this very upset woman slaps him and storms out of the room, and we hear applause. And I'm like, did he just break up with someone with an audience? Like his 2 friends are in the room with him, and they're like slow clapping him and giving him some guff about like, oh, Johnny, another one bites the dust. It's like, really? You couldn't have used some privacy for this? But okay. So Q gives him kind of like the rundown. You're 21 again, fresh out of the academy. And Q's like, I thought I was dead. Now it seems I'm alive. Like, what is going on? And this was actually a line that I really loved. Q says, you mortals are so obtuse. Why do you persist in believing that life and death are such static and rigid concepts? And I thought that line was brilliant because Q has command of the entire universe. He's like, I can take your life away in one moment and give it back to you in the next. These things are not set in stone, right? We're like, we think of time as linear. We think of life as, linear. You know, linear, right? And we think of it as finite, right? Where like, once it's gone, that's it. Once someone has passed, they're gone, right? But like, I love the idea of like in the greater universe and quantum physics and stuff like time, you know, when you start factoring in time as the 4th dimension, like maybe it's not. And I love that idea so much. And I think it was great for Q. That was just a great line.
Yeah. And it was very cute, right? To be like, yeah, you just have a limited perspective compared to me, which is very true. And so it turns out, because he's like, why did that girl smack you? Turns out that this wasn't a breakup. This was just one of Picard's many dates. And this date got upset because he had scheduled another date directly after this date. So he was already planning for this date to not take that long. So
he was doubling up. Yeah.
He was doubling up. Yeah. He was filling up his calendar for the evening. And she did not care for the way he filled it up because she felt like the day should have been just hers. So she smacked him. So he's like, well, I had a date with a girl named Penny, and he gets this big smile on his face. And he was all like, you cad or whatever. So he's like, I'd better go meet her now. So then he goes to meet Penny for his second date. So, I mean, that would have been a really short first date, I guess. I don't know. Or maybe it was the end of the first date. And she was just like, we're never going out again. But anyways, he goes to meet Penny. And did you notice Penny was quite a bit older than
Yes. I got super Blanche Devereaux vibes from Golden Girls. She's like a good 20 years older than any fresh Academy graduate. And she doesn't want to talk. Where he's like, can we just talk? And she's like, you know my name, you know my favorite color and my favorite movie. What more is there to say? Like, this woman is DTF, okay? I was like,
that's all she wanted. And I think that was probably clear last night when he made this date with her. They're probably both on the same page about that. Is like,
yes,
this is what I want. This is what I want. But now he's a different person. Now he's not just like, hey, you want to hook up? Let's do it. Now he's all like, let me get to know you and find out about your family history. And she's not. Yeah,
she's not there for that. I also get, this is kind of like Mrs. Robinson from The Graduate, like just the older woman who's enjoying this like younger man. Before he goes to the bar to meet Penny, Hugh basically tells him like, I'm giving you a second chance. Okay. You can do whatever you want with the second chance. You're at Starbase Earhart. It's 2 days before your encounter with the Naussicans. If you can avoid getting into that fight and getting stabbed through the heart, because what Q often says is like, your prosthetic heart is what failed, right? And why you're dead. So like, why do you have a fake heart? Like, why don't you have a real one? And that's when you get into the story of it. And so Q's like, okay, this is a thing that you regret. Like, if you can avoid getting into that fight with the Naussicans, I will put you back in the present with your real heart and your life can go on as it was supposed to go, right? So this now Picard is like, okay.
And actually that's a really good point that you brought up. I appreciate you going back to that because I actually had a question for you with that.
Oh yeah.
But he tells him all of this and Picard is not about this life because he's like, Q is such a trickster. He's like, I will not break the temporal prime directive, which is not what they're calling it yet. They don't call it that to Voyager, but he's basically saying that I won't break that. I'm not going to change all of history. I'm not going to change timelines just to amuse you. And Q is like, you're not that important. One person, you're not going to change history, which is false. But he's like, okay, fine. I promise that whatever you do now will only affect you and your life. I promise it will not affect history. It won't affect anything else. Everything else will go on as it did. And I was like, that's such a great caveat to put on anything that Q does because he's such a trickster. And then he said, but the trick is now, do you believe me or not? Like, do you believe that I'm going to keep my word? And it's like, he probably won't, but at least he tried,
Yeah.
And so my question for you, because I thought that was like, oh, what a smart caveat to have that little protection, assuming he keeps it, is if you could go back to age 21 and change anything with no consequences to the world and whatever else, just your own life, your own future, would you do it? Obviously knowing what you know now and all of that. It's similar to our Rascals question, right? But you're not going back to 12 and growing up again. You're just going back to 20, 21, and then popping back to now.
I don't think I would, because some of the big regrets that I have in my life drove me to be better and to do better and to make positive changes in my life. And if I avoid those negative things that I did in my 20s that were like, how could you be so stupid to do this? Like, there are still times I think back and I still will like kind of cringe. I'm like, oh God, if I hadn't made those mistakes, and some of them were like huge mistakes, if I hadn't made those mistakes, I wouldn't have had the like, come to Jesus moment in a way. Like, and I say that with a grain of salt because I'm not religious, but I wouldn't have had those moments to be like, Andrea, what are you doing with your life? You need to do better. I would really want to like avoid the pain of those mistakes, but also I think my life would have turned out differently and not for the better if I went back and like undid those. What about you?
Yeah, so I wrote in my notes, because I wanted to ask you this question, and I wrote in my notes, oh my gosh, I would do it in a heartbeat. I'd be so curious to see how my life would change. And then I thought about all the hardest things that have ever happened in my life. And I was like, okay, would I change this one? And then I was like, no. What about the next one? Okay, no, I wouldn't change that one either because it led to this, this, and this. Okay, what about the next one? And there was like nothing I would change. So, no.
Well, I guess
crazy.
Well, let's put this question out to you guys listening. Like, if you could go back to your 20s or some moment in your life that you really, really regret, like with no other consequences to like temporal prime directive, like, would you go back and like, you don't have to tell us what your thing is that you regret, but it's like, would you go back and change this? Or are you on balance better off in your life because of some of the things that like have happened that you wished like didn't? Info at the TNGpodcast.com. I totally want to hear like what you guys would say about this.
Yeah. It's a tough question, I think.
I think it is. And I think there's like no wrong answer. So that's always good. Now, here he is at the bar with Penny. He wants to talk. She does not want to talk. She goes to kiss him. He pulls away. She's insulted and throws a drink in his face. And as she storms off, the camera pans over and the bartender Q comes in to rib him. He's like, what was that about? Right? Penny, for your thoughts, Picard. I love all the little things that he does.
You know what I wrote in my notes? I put, wow, this is like while the date was going before the drink. I put, this is such a super awkward date scene. And then at the end, after she threw the drink, I said, oh, it's still better than Geordi's best date.
Because at least Penny was a real woman, okay?
Who was into him?
Geordi's,
I don't know. It just was, I was like, oh man, this is painful, but not as painful. Some of the other dates I've seen on this show.
As Geordi's. Yeah, that's the truth. So Picard's two friends, Corey and Marta, are playing Domjot, aka space billiards, and they're winning a bunch. And as the game ends,
so fun. I want to play that game.
Oh my god, that
game. I really want to play it.
I guess because I'm really bad at billiards, I'm like, oh no,
but
not more billiards.
Like billiards to me, it looked like pinball.
It looked like billiards, pinball,
but like
there is
flat.
There
and
is
I was like,
a type
super fun.
Yeah, there is a type of pool or billiards that has like little obstacles, like
really,
like screwed onto the table. I don't know what it's called,
no way.
But it has like I've seen it a couple of times where it looks actually just like a Domjot board.
Do they light up and make sounds?
They do not. They don't. But they're like little. They kind of look like the same obstacle thing.
No
so it's kind of like a fat bolt or nut or whatever, and just sort of like on the table that like the balls will bounce around and off of.
I want a Domjot table.
Okay, so we're working on that one, but of course, some Naussicans demand that they play with them, and Naussicans apparently learned how to speak English from the Ferengi because they're like, "You human, play!" Right?
Yeah. And of course, didn't we see Naussicans before? When did we see them before? Didn't we see them in the kidnapping episode? That wasn't Naussicans. That was something else.
No, that wasn't. We saw the Naussicans when Picard was like recalling
so way back
his fight with them, like way back when like Pulaski had to like operate on his heart or whatever. Yeah, somewhere season 2. But like, so the Naussicans are demanding that they play, and Corey, who I feel like is how they must have modeled, like the person they must have modeled like Tom Paris after. Yes. I totally feel like from Voyager. Corey is like young and cocky, and he's like, bring it on. And Picard's like, no, not at this time. No, right? So Picard sits back with Q and basically tells him the story of how it went the first time. Like the Nausicaan cheated, as he is right now. Corey figured it out later that night. The next day he went back looking for a fight, and they got one. And I love that Q says, that's a great story. It hits you right here. He points to his chest where Picard got stabbed. And I love that. So I just love this character so much, because that is 100% something I would say if I were trying to rib Picard over like what happened. It just cracks me up. Now, of course,
the plan that Corey comes up with is, let's rig the table so that we're going to cheat. And then I'll rematch them, and then we're going to beat them. And he said what happened was we rigged the table so that Corey could cheat. He did a rematch. He beat them. But turns out the Naussicans didn't like being beaten. So Corey was pissed because the Naussicans cheated. The Naussicans were pissed because they lost. So they lost, and they started a huge fight because they lost. And Picard was like, but Picard did say earlier, like, I started that fight. So they were mad because they lost, and then Picard jumped in and was like, "Oh yeah, what are you going to do about it?" or whatever, and that's when the whole fight broke out.
That's when the whole all of hell broke loose.
So he's like, "I just need to convince Corey not to do it, and then the fight will never happen, and then all will be well."
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, history does repeat itself because Corey wants to go back for a fight. And this is like later that night. And Picard says, what if we wants to fight? And Corey's like, well, then that's where I need to depend on my friends, which false. I'm going to say that right here. This is something I can't stand. Usually at a bar, someone will start mouthing off or pushing people around and get themselves in over their head and expect their friends to jump into a physical fight to like defend them, in air quotes. Mm-hmm. I remember somebody I used to know was telling me about like his time in the military and how many bar fights he got into, like defending his like dumbass loudmouth friends. And I remember being like, would you do that now? And he's like, oh, absolutely not, because I'm older and wiser now. Like, I'm sure in my youth, I jumped in to defend somebody, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure, but like, I am very, very firmly in the grown-up camp now of like, you want to mouth off to this group of bikers or whatever and like start shit, like that's on, like, I am not breaking my back to get you out of it. Like, don't do that, right?
So you're saying it's not really defending somebody if they started it.
Yeah, it's totally not. It's just dragging your friends into trouble. And like, I think a lot of times people who will do this, who like mouth off or like start something, knowing they've got like a whole gang of friends behind them to defend, they'll only be that brash and that cocky because they're like, but I've got like 20 friends here, right? Where it's like, but if those 20 friends are like, yeah, we're not getting into this, you suddenly are more polite. You know what I mean? So yeah, no, I'm full on in that, like, you want to start a fight? I'll be over here finishing like my cocoa. Let me know how I'll drive you to the hospital if you want, but like, I'm not getting in that.
Let me finish my cocoa. So Corey's just like, we gotta get revenge. And Picard's like, no, we're officers now. We have to set a higher standard for ourselves. He's giving them like some kind of like,
captain talk.
He's giving them some commemorative speech at like the Nobel Peace Prize award or something. Like, I'm not getting into a bar fight because some guy cheated me. Like, this level of conversation does not match. But anyways, this is what Picard tries, his like captain persuasion. And Corey's like, okay, fine, I guess you're right. And he storms off. And then Marta's just like, wow, you're really different. You're something about you is very strange now.
You seem so much more like grown up overnight.
Yeah. And she's like, and you usually are the one starting the fight. Like, this would have been your idea yesterday. So I don't know what's different today. And he's just like, oh, nothing really. I just thinking through some things or whatever. And they're kind of having this heart to heart. They're sitting like ridiculously close. And they're just having this heart to heart. And then Q comes in with a bouquet of flowers.
Dressed as a 1950s delivery boy, which I love, with the red bow tie.
Yeah. Yeah, I almost expect him to start singing, like a singing telegram, but he didn't for some reason.
So great. And he goes, flowers? Is there a John Luck Picard here? And he's got a big old bouquet of roses, and he walks in like, dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. Like, he's just so funny. It
was great. And then Marx is like, oh, it's probably from one of your conquests. I guess some things never change, Johnny. And she leaves. So it's clear that she's obsessed with him, but she's also his best friend. So she's trying to keep that like friend barrier /
I'm cool. I'm a friend. Yeah. Yes. I'm cool. I'm one of the friends.
And I was so curious.
I'm really in love with you.
Right. I was so curious watching this. I was like, I wonder if young Picard had any idea that she was like obsessed with him, or if he was just like, whatever, all the ladies like me. Haha. I don't know.
I'm guessing probably the latter.
Yeah.
But Q is like, so Marta, off she goes. Q is delighted to tell Picard that Corey's in the bar ringing the Domjot table to win. So Picard's like, leave the flowers, I gotta go. And he rushes off to stop Corey from making the serious mistake. And Corey's like, what are you, my mom? Get out of here. Like, he was not having it at all. And Picard's like, it's a mistake. You can get hurt. Think about the future and your actions. And that's when Corey's like,
consequences.
Yeah, get out of here, Dad. Like, this isn't, get out of here, right? So Picard is hoping his words have given Corey something to think about, because that's what Picard
he finally threatens him. He says, if you go through with this, I'm going to tell the gambling commissioner on you. Like, basically to get him arrested, for cheating or whatever, maybe break his thumbs, whatever gambling commissioners do on that starbase they're at.
On Starbase Earhart.
On Starbase Earhart, whatever terrible.
First of all, why is a gambling commissioner posted on a starbase? That's what I'd like to know. But okay.
Terrifying consequences happen on Starbase Earhart. It's gonna befall him terribly. So Corey's like, fine. And he storms off, and he's super pissed because, that was really a move of betrayal. It really was. And I get Picard's being a grown-up here, but that's why maybe you shouldn't be friends with kids. I don't know, whatever. Anyways.
Maybe that's why you shouldn't be hanging out with people 35 years younger than you, okay?
Right, because if I was hanging out with someone 35, if I was hanging out with my nephew and his friends who are all in high school, like, they're going to act dumb because they're in high school.
Yeah.
I'm the problem in that situation, not them.
Yeah.
If it's a group of high school kids acting dumb, that's what high school kids do. This is their time to do that. I have graduated from that experience, so I should not still be doing that. Like, I'm too big. But anyways, so Corey storms off, and you're just like, yeah, Picard, like, I don't know. And so he goes back to his quarters. He's telling Marta his woes, and he's just like, man, I hope that didn't like ruin our friendship, because he and I were friends for years after this. And she's like, wait, what? And he's like, I mean, we'll be friends for years after this, or something stupid.
Something dumb.
So they kind of like start finishing their heart-to-heart that they started earlier. And basically they finally confess their feelings for each other. They start kissing, they hook up.
Curtains billowing.
Next day, Picard's like snoozing and he feels a finger tickling his ear. So he's like, oh, hey, Marta. So he rolls over, making heart eyes, and he opens those heart eyes and sees Q in the bed with him. And he immediately pulls the covers up as high as he can on his naked chest. Which is just Q says, so funny.
Q says, morning, darling.
He's just like, Q's like, what are you doing here? Yeah. I wrote in my notes, ha 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 ha. Like, it was just so funny.
It's a really, really great scene. And Picard, he gets, I hate to use this word, but he gets very stiff. It's immediately like, like pulls his blanket up over his chest, which is bare, right? Because he's naked in bed, right? And so the next scene is actually like this. He goes to the chow hall to meet Marta, and I think that it's this like great kind of gender reversal against the stereotype where in this type of situation, friends hook up and the girl will be like, I'm so glad we confessed our feelings. And the guy is usually like, let's just keep it friendly, right? But this time Marta's like, oh, it's you. Like, he kisses her on the head. He's like, good morning. And he's holding her hand. And I'm trying not to be weirded out that this like almost 60-year-old man is like holding hands with like a 21-year-old. I'm like, okay. And she's like, oh, it's you. I may regret what happened. I'm afraid we ruined our friendship. And I was like, what? This is one of the parts of the story.
Too late? That's kind of what I was thinking. Like, you didn't think about that last night? I mean...
No, because her hormones were racing. But to be fair to Picard, she's literally given this like 15 minutes of thought. Like, you might want to think this through because you didn't even give it a chance to like see what could happen. Like, that's...
Well, but her thing is she's like, we're all going to be shipped off tomorrow because that's when they get their assignments. So she's just like, what was even the point of this? It can't even be a thing. But I feel like even though they have deep space missions, I feel like they go to Earth every other day. Like I just feel like you're not going to be that far apart from anybody. Like, there's subspace communications. They get time off all the time. Like,
but I mean,
long distance seems different to me.
Even if like you don't want to do, like, for me, long distance relationships don't work. It doesn't work for me. So even if you know that like you've had this like affair, you know, you've confessed your feelings, you guys slept together and you're shipping out tomorrow, there's no need to be weird about it then. Like, if we're shipping out tomorrow and we're not going to be like a couple, like, let's just enjoy last night for what it was. Let's just leave on a high note and be like, wow, I had this really great friendship. It developed into something more kind of like too close to like the end, right? Where we had to leave. But it's like, you can leave with all these like wonderful memories. You don't have to be like, it's ruined now. Girl, slow down. Okay. But okay. Now we have what I like to call the worst farewell party of ever, because neither Corey nor Marta want to talk to Picard, who's like, so, Starbase Jupiter, huh? It sounds like it's going to be great.
And Q sitting at the next table just staring at them. So for Picard to alienate his two best friends is, to me, like, he really alienated his two only friends. Everyone else is just fans. And like, oh, that's got to be so lonely and painful. And he's thinking he's doing the right thing, and he's just messing everything up.
Yeah, he is doing the right thing. But he's also like, it has consequences, right? It does, because Corey is super pissed. Yeah. And like Marta is like, I slept with you. Like, I slept with you. I really wanted to sleep with you. I slept with you. And now I wish I hadn't, which I'm also like, why? Like, I don't understand why she's feeling all kind of way about it. But whatever. This is one of the things in the episode that bothers me, where I'm like, that story doesn't track, but whatever. So now the Naussicans come in to this really shitty farewell party and demands that they play dumb jot with them. And Picard's like, no. But of course the Naussicans call him a coward. And I really hate the lazy writing here, because when somebody says no and the bad guy calls him a coward or a chicken, all of a sudden the protagonist is like, what did you just say?
Yeah,
I'm in, right? I'm like,
it's such an Indiana Jones move, right? It's like,
it's so Back to the Future. Where it's like, what are you, chicken?
Have to fight. Yeah.
If somebody's like, what are you, chicken? I'd be like, buck, 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 and I would just walk away. It's like, just walk away. Who cares what these fucking idiots think? Yeah. Who cares what they think? It doesn't matter at all. But whatever. Okay. Corey goes in to fight the Naussicans, and Picard pushes Corey out of the way, and the Naussicans go off like laughing. And Picard, completely reasonably explains to Corey that the Nausican was reaching for a weapon. And instead of a thank you for saving my life, Corey's like, I don't even know who you are anymore, and storms off. And I'm like, what?
You know what? I get what Corey's coming from, though, because Corey didn't see any weapon. Corey's used to him and Picard fighting when at like the drop of a hat. And here, when he goes to take a swing, Picard knocks him over. And it's just like, whose side are you on? And he was already feeling like Picard's changed and he's being weird. But at this moment, when instead of jumping in the fight or something, he actually seems to turn on Corey. I could see Corey being like, you know what? You've changed so much. I don't even recognize you. And I don't want to be a part of whatever is going on with you. It's almost like reverse drugs, right? Like he's taking drugs that's making him boring. As opposed to what people think, people assume it makes you more excited, whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he's taking some drugs that make him super boring. And he's just like, I don't want anything to do with this at all. And he storms off and he's pissed and he's embarrassed and all the stuff. But I really think it's that Picard's been acting really weird. And this was the last straw. And Marta was already over him. As soon as she started breakfast, she was already over it. So she's just like, bye, Johnny. Like she was already super done. She was only at this dinner because they agreed to do it before time. So it was just really painful and really sad. And he's just standing there like sad. Looking at an overturned table by himself.
Right. And Q comes up and he says, congratulations, you managed to stop the fight from happening, and snaps him into the future, like into the present, where Picard is standing on the bridge, but he's wearing a blue science officer uniform. And Worf is like, can I help you, Mr. Picard? And it's like, oh shit, what is happening? Like Q's totally disoriented. He asks like, basically like, who am I? And it's like, you are Lieutenant Junior Grade Assistant Astrophysics Officer. The captain of the ship is Thomas Holloway. Because he's like, well, who's the captain? Fun fact. Before the rewrite, the captain of the ship in this present was going to be Captain Jellicoe.
I was hoping it was Jellicoe, actually.
Right?
I was like, wouldn't it was going to be Jellicoe? And I was like, because at first I was like, maybe it's Riker because that's like a good default. And I was like, no, because Riker would still not be the captain. For some reason, I was just like, he just still wouldn't.
Always be a bridesmaid, never a bride.
Yeah. No matter who's the captain of the ship, it's not going to be Riker. And I was like, ooh, what if it was Jellicoe? Ooh, that would be, because the whole ship would be different.
It was going to be Jellicoe, and I really wish. I don't know. It got written out like in the rewrite, but I was like, man,
because then that would have been a whole storyline of its own. Versus a captain we've never heard of, then we never even have to see him because it's not.
And you never have to see him. Yeah.
But if it was Jellicoe, we would have to see Jellicoe, and we would have to see like a ship run by Jellicoe is going to be so different from a ship run by Picard. So everything would have been different. What weirded me out was he's wearing blue, which is the medical officer's uniform. But he's a science officer. So I was like, shouldn't he be in yellow? But then I also have this question always because I'm like, they're all science. They're like the whole ship is a ship of scientific exploration.
It's a STEM ship. Yeah.
It's a STEM ship. So the colors don't totally always
they don't
sense
super matter
any ways. So he's like,
no, because in the episode it's coming up in a few episodes, Lessons, where he falls for that science officer. She's also wearing blue as well. So I think science and medical are blue. I feel like
medical's blue. Like Troy wears blue, Bev wears blue, science is yellow, Geordi wears yellow, Data wears yellow. Like they never. This is the first time. This is the first time where blue. Yeah, this is the first time where blue is not medical. This episode.
I feel like we've seen blue before. Okay, well, I guess maybe because I'm just prepping ahead. Like we're going to see that, so maybe I was thinking ahead. Now Picard goes to sickbay because Worf and Data are like, "Are you sure you're okay, Mr. Picard?" And he's like, "Maybe I'll just go get checked out." Now, who is the chief medical officer? But Q at Sigmund Freud. He's in Beverly's office and he tells him that like nothing has changed except for Picard, as promised.
Because Picard's like, what are you talking? Everything's different. What's going on, Q? And he's like,
no,
no,
everything's the same except for your story. And because of your choices, this is who you are today. You get to live out the rest of your life in safety, running tests, delivering reports, and being safe. And I was like,
he says something like, he says delivering reports. He says delivering reports to your superior officers. And it's just like, oh, talk about a stab in the heart, right? Yeah. Like he was the boss of the flagship and now he's just a cog in the machine.
He really, really is. Now he goes to 10 forward. He runs into Riker and Troy and he wants to talk about his future on the Enterprise with them. And this is the part that is always super depressing to me. Like they politely say that his performance records have always been good, but like maybe not stellar. And he kind of pushes on it. And they're
Did you
like,
hear the kind of compliments they gave him where they're like, really like you're scraping the
punctual.
Bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, you're punctual.
When Riker points out you're punctual, like that was the best thing he could pull out. And
that's
Picard goes, I see. He's like, he understands what that is code for.
Yeah.
Like, we have nothing good to say about you, which is really
like, we don't have anything really bad to say about you, but also not that good either. And Picard keeps pushing, and they're like, maybe we should just save this for your performance review. And he's like, please, it's really important. I really want to talk about it now. What would you say if I said I've been thinking I can do more, or maybe even have do a command post or something? And they're like, frankly, I'm sorry, but this isn't super realistic. Like, and Picard's like, I think I could do more. And I love that Troy is the nice judge on America's Got Talent. She's not the Simon Cowell, right? Mm-hmm. She's the one that's like, you really tried your hardest, and she's like, but isn't that always the problem though? Like, you've always had lofty goals, but you've never been willing to do what's necessary to attain them. Like, if you want to get ahead, you have to take chances. You have to stand out in a crowd and you have to get noticed. And it's like, this is where it really hits him. Like, he's led a very safe life, and it's not made him the person that he really is. Like, safety is not synonymous with Picard.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. True. And then at the end of this painful conversation where he realizes that like it's never going to happen, Riker does say, well, maybe we can transfer you to kind of like do an internship in engineering or something, doing something somewhere where like maybe you could he's really trying to find a compromise and find something he can do that like he can actually complete and not feel like a loser at. And Picard is just like, thank you. And then the senior staff get called, and you see Picard start to stand, and then the two of them stand up. Riker and Troy stand up and leave, and Picard stays seated because he's like, right, I'm not in senior command. Like, that call was not for me. And I think it was that moment where he's just like, oh my gosh. And then Geordi calms him and is like, Lieutenant Picard, I'm still waiting for that report. And he was like, oh, shoot, because when he showed up on the bridge...
It's Barclay again. Yeah.
Really. When he showed up on the bridge originally, he was supposed to be in engineering, delivering some data pad, which, why do they have to... You know what, that's a separate conversation.
Doesn't matter who. So, that's an email. Could have been an email.
Could have been an email. The computer probably could have just told you. But he's like, oh, yes, on my way. And as he's heading to the turbo lift, I was just like, it was like the walk of shame. Just heading to the turbo lift and being like, this is my life now because I played it safe for so long. I don't stand out. I don't take risks. I haven't done anything impactful. And now this is my life, is running data pads from floor to floor, something which we really don't even need a person for. So that's like really, really painful. And I actually didn't know what was going to happen next because I didn't remember every part of this episode. So I was like, where's he going to, like, is he going to end up with Geordi? Like, what's going to happen? But when the doors to the turbo lift open, he's back in the Matrix. And I was like, oh, so does he get like
well, because he had said like, Q, get me out of here. Yeah. Like, you've made your point, like, get me out of here. Right. And nothing happens.
Yeah.
And then that's when he's like, okay. He had said, Q, get me out of here.
Back in 10 forward. Yeah.
Yeah. Back in 10 forward before Geordi was like, hey, I'm waiting on that report. So he's like, okay, Q never responded to me, which has got to be a tough thing when you're talking to an all powerful entity where you're talking to the thin air, but you're like, are you actually listening? Or are you just letting me suffer? Like, this sucks. So that's when he's like, okay, I'm on my way with this report to Geordi. He goes into the turbo lift. And as the turbo lift doors open at main engineering, that's where it's like, we're back in the afterlife. And Q's like, I don't know what you're upset about. I gave you everything that you asked for. And Q's like, Picard's like, this isn't my life. Like, this isn't the life that I had. And he's like, but this Picard is the life that you chose, which I think is crazy. Because if you undo like one mistake, I doubt it's going to change your entire life unless it was like a life or death kind of situation. Yes. But like, okay, I feel like not getting stabbed in the heart, however, probably wouldn't have changed his whole life.
But I disagree with you there, because if you think back to earlier in this conversation when you talked about one of the decisions that you made that was nearly life-threatening, literally changed your whole life. Like,
I guess it did.
It did. And the reason why it did was because of that near-death experience. It gives you clarity. It gives you a new perspective. And that's what Q tells Picard here. She says it's because of that moment when you started to get clarity on like, what is life about? Life is short. What do I want my life to be about? Like, you started asking yourself the kinds of questions that helped you become the man you are today. And without that near-death experience, you would have just stayed that cocky person. Or, with being a really boring person, you just stayed a really boring person. But the idea is, I don't think every one little thing that you change is going to have a big ripple effect on your future. But I do think moments like this, like you nearly dying or a loved one dying or something really big like that, really shifts your whole perspective on who you are and how you are in the world. And changing that memory, that moment could be really, really powerful. So I totally believed it. And Picard just like begs Q to just send him back. Like, let me go back to that moment. And Q is like, you realize you would die, right? Like, you died on the table. You died because you lost your heart, you had a fake heart, and you died. Like, if I send you back, you're going to die. And Picard just says something really powerful. He's like, I'd rather die as the man that I was than to live as the man I've become, because this life that he now has is not worth living. And I thought that was a really powerful, like, moral of the story without being the moral of the story.
Yeah. Yes, 100%.
It was great. It was a great line.
Which is, you're right, because Q tells him, like, this Picard's life never came into focus. He drifted, going from one assignment to the next and being completely, like, insignificant. And that's when Picard's like, I can't live that life. Like, I'd rather die the man I was than live this life. So Q snaps him back to the bar on Earhart Station, and Picard immediately takes the Naussicans on, gets stabbed in the heart, and just like that, Picard gets his happy ending. He gets stabbed through the heart. He looks down at the knife. He laughs. He collapses. And he comes to on the bio bed in sickbay, still laughing. Like, his bio signs are stable. Beverly's like, I don't know what just happened, but, like, you're going to be okay. And it's like, wow. So Q really gave him his life back.
And he really did keep him dead, which he could have. But he
could have, like, I think he owes Q so much. Like, as much as Picard hates on Q.
Yeah.
Q has saved their asses more times than I can count, and he's
also been the one who put them in danger in the first place, except for this time.
In this situation, he didn't. Yeah, like with the Borg, it's like you introduced the Borgs to the humans way before the humans were ready, right? So it's like, that's really messed up.
Or like in Sherwood Forest, like he snatches them up and puts them in danger and has a little game with them, but that is not the case here. Like,
no, here Picard got himself into a scrape and was killed, and Q came, I'm going to say this phrase, out of the goodness of his own heart to have some fun with Picard, right? Like, has a little fun with him and, like, actually gives him his life back because he would have been dead, which I was like, oh my gosh. So now in the observation lounge, Picard, who's like all healed up, tells Riker about his experience with Q, and Picard spins some, like, Riker's like, God, I wish I could have kind of known this, like, Johnny P, or whatever. And Picard's like, how much time you got, buddy? Yeah, like, Picard just spins some wild tales of his youth, and he's like, well, if that's crazy, picture this, right? And I think it's just lovely because the ship goes on, and it's like, okay, cool. It's a wonderful life. You got your life back.
It becomes a good bonding moment.
Yes.
And also, I love that Picard tells Riker, he says, I owe Q a debt of gratitude. And Riker's like, what do you mean? It sounds like he put you through hell. And Picard's like, well, no, it's like the messy parts of my life I wanted to hide, I wanted to get rid of, but turns out when you pull that thread, it unweaves the entire tapestry, hence the name of the episode, right? Like, it unravels everything, which is, I had this realization earlier in the episode when I asked myself that question of would I go back? And I was like, yes, I would undo this thing. And I was like, no, because that completely shifted my perspective of the world. So I was like, no, I needed that. So I was like, well, what about this other thing? I was like, no, that also shifted. And I was like, no, I can't. If you remove those, I'm not who I am. Unlike you, I don't think I would be a worse off. I just think I'd be different. And I like who I am. I like the lessons I've learned. I like how I have become because of those situations. And I don't want to trade that for something else. Like, I appreciate the lessons I've learned, like the humility I've learned in areas where I was really arrogant. Like, I appreciate that. And I like those changes. And I don't want that to be different. So I agree with you. I think Picard does owe Q a huge debt of gratitude. Q saved his life and helped him appreciate his past, which is really beautiful and totally unnecessary.
He sure did.
So he didn't come to just torment him this time. He came and really gave him a chance to redo stuff and to appreciate himself more, which I think is really, really cool.
I think it's really cool too. Like, I like the messaging and the branding of this story. I think that there were just a lot of, and I guess I'm going into final thoughts, like, there's just a lot of things that didn't super make sense here. Like, the whole Marta thing I thought was terrible, right? As soon as they hook up, she's like, the friendship is ruined. Goodbye. It's like, girl, you just woke up, like, from the night before. Like, you just woke up. Like, give yourself a minute to think this through before you start cutting out some friendships you've had for years, right?
Yeah.
And then also, I wish they would have cast a age appropriate actor to play that 21-year-old, because Q even says, like, because Picard's like, I don't look like I'm 21. He's like, yeah, but to everybody else, you will look 21. And I'm like, why didn't we just get because again,
because we had him in the beginning with when they saw the Naussicans stab through the heart, we had young Picard. So I actually thought
why
that
didn't we just play
Picard the whole time, but it never happened. And I was
it feels a little bit like they didn't trust the audience to remember this was Picard, so they had to show us Patrick Stewart. And it's like, no, we got it. Like, just like in Rascals, we knew that 12-year-old kid was Picard. Like, we got it.
Yeah.
We could have just, right? Because then it also was really weird. We would have understood that because we're Trekkies, so we've got like more than one brain cell bouncing around in there. Like, doesn't make us geniuses, but like we could have tracked that. Okay. Also, it made it, to me, it just felt really weird to see this like 21-year-old actress making out with Patrick Stewart, who was like in his 60s at this point. I was like, it just, the whole thing, like, I don't love this episode. I think it's kind of depressing. I think it spends too much time at like Station Earhart and not enough time in like his future or whatever. So yeah, it's not my favorite Q episode, but damn it, I just love seeing John Delancey as Q so much. Like, it just makes me really happy. What are your final thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, I really like this storyline a lot. Similar to you, is I didn't love the episode. I didn't catch the things that don't super make sense until you pointed them out. And I was like, yeah, I agree with that. The only thing was I did want the younger Picard, like that. Because they had the actor in that opening scene of him in the afterlife. I was like, oh, cool. We're going to see a whole episode of like young Picard, but it's a different person. That would have been really cool. I agree with you completely. They spent way too much time in the past and not enough time with his future life. I think a 50-50 would have probably been weird. It did need to be unbalanced, but like it was like an 80-20 or like a 90-10.
Yeah, it was like a 90-10. It's like, okay, we get it. Station Earhart, we got it. Yeah.
It was a lot of that, and I don't know if the emotional payoff was that fantastic.
It wasn't.
But I will say, like, yeah, similar to what you mentioned before with the conundrum episode, that's the other thing I put in my notes. I said this type of storyline, the flashback, the flashback redo and then fast forward, is right up there for me with the Groundhog Day type episodes, where it's just like you do them over and over. Like, I will always love those episodes. Like, I will always love them because you've got the familiar, but you've also got the variety. You've got the new, and you don't know what's going to happen, but you think you know what's going to happen, and then you get to look and see what changes. And I think that's really fun. So overall, I love the idea. And I don't love the episode as much as I remembered, which is actually probably a first for me.
It's a little bit disappointing, isn't it? Where you're like, oh, and I really want to love this episode so much because it's Q, and I'm like, yes,
and Q is so great,
but it's so great, but it just really fell flat to me. But all right, well, because the episode fell flat, we can walk away from it going, not feel too strongly one way or another about it.
True.
But next week we are breaking down season 6, episode 16, Birthright Part 1. So we've got another 2-parter coming up, which is going to be interesting. Guys, thank you so much for listening and hanging with us. We will catch you next week.
Bye.
Thanks for geeking out with us. Be sure to join the crew at thetngpodcast.com to be the first to know when we do our live shows or host events exclusively for our members. We'll see you next time.